Well, Seattle hockey fans, as much as the Seattle Kraken need a head coach before next season, I'm sure glad there's one particular candidate that's off the board. But that being said, who are some of the candidates that might work for Seattle? We'll talk about that and more on today's episode of Locked On Kraken.
You are Locked On Kraken, your daily podcast on the Seattle Kraken, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's good, Seattle hockey fans? Welcome to another episode of Locked On Kraken, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where we bring you your favorite team, the Seattle Kraken, every single day. Erica L. Ayala here, your host of Locked On Kraken. I'm also a contributor at CBS Sports, where I talk the hockey and women's basketball. Also the founder of Black Rosie Media, where we cover your Seattle Storm, as well as the New York Liberty and Black and women and melanated creators throughout sports media. And Black Rosie Media, once again, is headed to the Olympics. More on that as we get a little closer to Milano Cortina. And the coaching carousel, things certainly got interesting. And the Pacific Division will have a new head coach. Nope, not for the Kraken, but we'll talk about that. First, let me tell you, today's episode of Locked On Kraken brought to you by our friends at Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Yeah, so the news came in today that the Anaheim Ducks hire Joel Quenneville as their new head coach. With the announcement, Quenneville becomes the 12th head coach in franchise history. And, well, if you're wondering what Quenneville's been doing, well, he's been on the sidelines because he stepped down from his position with the Florida Panthers following a 2021 report that he had, quote, not acted appropriately when handling a serious situation in Chicago. Of course, if you're familiar with Kyle Beach, I'm apologies, I should have said trigger warning. If you're familiar with the situation and the allegations and the reports of sexual abuse and how that was handled by the Blackhawks organization, by Chicago, then you, of course, are familiar with Joel Quenneville. A blemish, to say the least. That is an understatement for not just the National Hockey League, not just the Chicago hockey team, but truly hockey overall. And unfortunately, not the only incident that has been reported in the last handful of years and been under investigation. Now, the Anaheim Ducks did address that issue in their statement. I'm going to read what they had to say. Over the last 2 weeks, we conducted interviews with many outstanding coaching candidates while simultaneously conducting a comprehensive review of what took place while Joel was head coach of the Blackhawks in 2010. We spoke with dozens of individuals, including advocates for a positive change in hockey and leadership of the NHL, which last July officially cleared Joel to seek employment in the league. Our findings are consistent with Joel's account that he was not fully aware of the severity of what transpired in 2010. Now I'm going to stop the statement right there. What does that even mean? If someone is talking about sexual harassment and sexual assault, and you don't you don't know the severity, and then the gentleman in question, Joel Quenneville in this case, has gone on the record to say he should have asked more questions. I really don't know what to say about that. I just convenient is an understatement here, and I for one am not buying it because it's your job to know, and when someone comes to you with something and you don't follow up, that's because you don't want to know. That is my strong opinion, and I'm sticking to it. We see this happen with cases of assault and abuse, wrongdoing all of the time. Racism, sexism, xenophobia. That's how these things are perpetuated. So, but the organization says they did a thorough investigation, and the statement goes on to say, it is clear that Joel deeply regrets not following up with more questions at the time, has demonstrated meaningful personal growth and accountability, and has earned the opportunity to return to coaching. Now, here's the thing. I am all for, generally speaking, giving people opportunities. That being said, for me, and I would hope for society, there are just certain things that when you don't ask enough questions and you are willfully ignorant, I'm not really buying it. We live in a society, and especially since 2025 in the United States, where there are people acting in bad form, bad behavior, egregiously ill intent, that make excuses for their behavior while also criminalizing things that are not criminal behavior. And for this to be happening in this climate is mind-boggling to me. So good luck, Anaheim, in a absolutely not really kind of way. But thank you, Anaheim, because there are some lists that I have not even mentioned on this podcast that actually had Quenneville on a list of potential candidates for the Seattle Kraken. And if that had happened, I'm just not sure how I would go about every day bringing you your team with an egregious situation as we saw in Chicago. And I talked about this at the time because the reporting basically said that nobody was responsible. And to me, that is a big piling, steaming pile of manure. People that were directly told, kind of an overseeing committee that was given information. So nobody was responsible, but everybody could have done better. If I remember the reporting correctly at the time, I remember thinking, what does that mean exactly? So there you go. Joel Quenneville will be in the Pacific Division. He's excited to join the Anaheim Ducks organization. They have incredible ownership, management, and passionate fans. And nearly 4 years away from the game, I have learned from my prior mistakes and realized it will be actions over words that demonstrate my commitment to being a better leader. Yeah, no crap, sir. Disrespectfully. But, some people just get second chances and others are demonized for raising a fist in solidarity of Black Lives Mattering. But, cool. Love this place. On my freaking birthday, got me worked up, not just about hockey, that's one thing, but this specific thing. Do you think I wanted to come on here and talk about this? Absolutely not. But as I said, the bright spot is he is not coming to Seattle. He's not coming to Seattle. And so I will take that. I don't really have much more to say on this without, popping a vein, but we can take this opportunity to talk about the Seattle Kraken and who could fill a coaching role. There are a few names. I told you one that I'm really excited about from the AHL. There's another coach that a lot of people are really high on, but maybe, just maybe, this particular coach doesn't want to deal with all of the mess that is the National Hockey League. We'll talk about that coming up on today's episode of Locked On Kraken. Today's episode of Locked On Kraken brought to you by our friends at Indeed. You just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. When it comes to hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites. Indeed's sponsored jobs puts your post at the top of the page and helps reach the right candidates faster. And, I run a small business. Hiring the right people can be difficult. You think you have a match and then, something happens, or you just, are always trying to, you think you have a match and something happens, or you do find a good candidate, but then they grow and want to go on and do other things, which is absolutely natural and normal. And then you find yourself having to hire again. And being able to get candidates that are a good match off the hop is going to save so much time. So now you can speed up your hiring process with a $75 sponsored job credit. Just go to indeed.com/locked on right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring Indeed is all you need. All right, everydayers. Thanks as always for making Kraken, the Locked On Kraken show, a part of your daily destination and even your first listen of the day. Erica L. Ayala back here, and went on a little bit of a rant, but one candidate off of the board. So who could the Seattle Kraken hire? I've seen a few names thrown out there: Marco Sturm, Jay Woodcroft, Joe Sacco, Bruce Botterill, but there's two names that for me seem to fit what the Seattle Kraken need, depending on how short or long the "as soon as possible," I'm using air quotes for those listening on audio, for those for the "as soon as possible," if "as soon as possible" is literally next season, or if "as soon as possible" is in the next 5 years. I think you also need someone that can develop young talent, has that experience, but also can win over veterans. And there are two candidates. One I've talked about a little bit: Todd Nelson. Now, the reason that I particularly like Todd Nelson, currently coaching with the Hershey Bears, our AHL affiliate, knows a little bit something about that. But you have someone like Dan Bylsma who knows how to win. Unlike Dan Bylsma, we of course know that the Hershey Bears have been able to get over the hump. Now, could it be a little bit of a so you break up and then you get with your ex's ex? I mean, maybe. I don't know. I don't know how people feel about that, but Todd Nelson could be an intriguing name. Has been working with the Hershey Bears, obviously can really put together a team with the Bears to win, to be a perennial powerhouse in the AHL. That continuity, that consistency, as soon as possible, is what the Seattle Kraken want. And so that's why, for me, Todd Nelson could be a name worth pursuing. I do need to do a little bit more research on Todd and just, what he's been able to do. We've been hearing a lot that, Rick Tocchet could be someone that comes over as well. We have been hearing that maybe he has seen some interest from the Seattle Kraken. I haven't gotten to the stage where I can report it quite as fact yet, but I believe he had an interview with the Seattle Kraken. That's Frank Saravalli saying that. Also Saravalli saying it's probably a long shot, but could be a name. But the other name that I don't think is a long shot, and actually 4 or so months ago on the 32 Thoughts podcast, we heard a lot about this head coach. He also coached who I thought we should have taken in the draft last year, Zeev Buium, at USA Hockey and at Denver, and that is David Carle, just really seems like a guy that gets it, has been able to coach successful World Junior teams with USA Hockey, has been successful at Denver, and is only 35 years old. So from the 32 Thoughts podcast in particular, the guy's really high on what Carle can do, obviously with a winning resume, with young talent, which the Seattle Kraken need a coach that can deal with that. So probably not Tortorella, just as an example, but I've already talked about that. And I talked about the other guy I would prefer not on so many levels. But another thing that was mentioned on the 32 Thoughts podcast, which maybe also hints at why I think maybe Dan Bylsma was in the hot seat is that David Carl, we're hearing people are very high on that he is someone that can win over veterans. And I'm not exactly sure that Dan Bilesma was able to do that. I keep telling you, for me, it seems like there was a power struggle at some level. I do think that at some point in time, it came through in the locker room. I alluded to this during the season. I didn't want to believe it because I really like Dan Bilesma and I wasn't hearing anything about that, but the sending a message, the resets, the hit from Tanev on Shane Wright, I told you right then and there, if I didn't have an understanding before, that to me was clear. And do I think it was a fair hit in the game of hockey? Sure. But within the context of the Seattle Kraken, well, you know, for a coaching staff and an organization that was sending messages all season, I will tell you what, Brandon Tanev sure sent a message of his own in his return to Climate Pledge Arena. Yeah. So understanding is that Carl can handle that dynamic. At least that's what experts and analysts around hockey are saying. And he's been a pretty touted young, 35 years old. A touted, respected coach. And the 32 Thoughts podcast was so high on this guy saying, I don't know how he gets passed over. They also said, I have no idea how Zeev Buium dropped to, 12, 13, something like that. I'm inclined to agree, but neither here nor there. But there's a little bit of an issue with David Carl, and that is that he's got a nice situation at Denver that maybe he doesn't want to leave. And can you really blame the guy? I mean, it sounds like a pretty cushy situation. And, even recently he was asked about that. He just signed a multi-year extension. And, he said that, there's some guys in the NHL who might want to trade positions with me. I'm going to read the full quote for you here. This is coming from the Denver Post on today. I should say it was updated just a little while ago at the time that I'm recording. But yes, this came out today on my birthday, May 8th. Yes, it is my birthday. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Yes, I do appreciate that. I don't know. I don't usually make a big deal out of my birthday, but I just kind of like saying it's my birthday because it is my birthday. That is indeed a fact. Anyway, here's what he has said. I've stated this before, but there's no issue in being patient. At the end of the day, I think it is the best job, being at Denver, outside the NHL, potentially a better job. Some guys in the NHL would trade with me if they had the opportunity. And you know what? You definitely get more job security on the NCAA side. I talk about that when I cover basketball all of the time. Again, 35 years old, a young coach, has a young family, but he has admitted that he's spoken with, quote, a few teams about NHL head coaching jobs, some of them that have been reported: San Jose in 2022, St. Louis in 2024, Chicago and Anaheim. Well, we saw what Anaheim did. But what he also said is, I think you're always open-minded to things that come your way and wanting to have those conversations. I think it only helps me learn and grow. It only helps our program in many ways, and certainly some decisions needed to be made. But we chose to make the decision we thought was best for our family, and that was obviously to stay here at Denver. And so there you go. Although David Carl seems like a great candidate, doesn't seem like he's available. So who else perhaps is going to be the pick for the next head coach? I really still can't believe that I'm talking about the Seattle Kraken having to hire a new head coach, but this is the world that we live in. And this coach has to perform. But more so, if the coach doesn't perform, what happens with this leadership group? What happens with the roster? Who is going to be to blame this time if it doesn't work out for the Seattle Kraken? Because yes, as soon as possible may be subjective, but it can't be more than 5 years. I really think it's ridiculous to think that it's more than 2 or 3 years. And if this team doesn't make progress next season, then what did we do all of that for? So the next head coach and let's just talk about Carl. He's talked about has to be the right decision for his family, but outside of Carl, what kind of coaches are going to want to step into the situation that I just laid out? Lots of pressure, have to perform immediately. What guarantees can be offered? And then you run a little bit of a risk there as an organization. You get locked into someone. What promises can you make? What are you saying before the handshake kind of things is what I'm talking about here. Because there are contracts, but then, we know how business is done, the room where it happens. Who looks at this organization and is like, yep, I feel like I can own my team when they're going into another year on a head coach search? Is the vision of the organization being better articulated than it is kind of in public to any coaching candidates? You still need someone, unless they drastically change the roster, you need someone who can communicate with young players. Is someone over 60 the right choice? That sounded like ageism, and I don't like ageism when it comes to the on the wrong side of 30. And I think that it's been documented that at a certain pivot point, there are just certain coaches in the NHL, because they get cycled around, that have a more difficult time going with the times than others. You need a coach that's going to be nimble, that believes, understands, appreciates, and will respect and lean into the process of developing talent. We've heard from Jessica Campbell, and I broke that down with Shane Wright in particular. We're going to talk about Maddie Beniers tomorrow, Friday. We talked about Berkeley Catton yesterday. We've heard from the higher ups, the execs, that yes, there will be development, player development. That's a part of the role. That's the expectation of this organization and the prospect pool coming up. So if you're not going to do that, you're not the right coach. So what does that leave realistically? Carl sounds like a great choice, and he knows he's got a good thing going at Denver. Good for him. Good for him and his family. I don't know. I'm not moved by some of the options that have been thrown out. So do you get an unproven person? I guess you could, but how do you make sure that that unproven, rising coaching star does any better than what Bilesma could have done with a little bit more time? I don't know, Kraken fans. I don't know, but I guess we'll see how it all plays out, and we'll talk about that as it develops. Before we close out, let's talk a little bit about your AHL team. Speaking of player development, that's coming up on today's episode of Locked On Kraken. And this episode of Locked On Kraken, as I mentioned at the top of the show, brought to you by our friends at Monarch Money. You ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Yeah, that's me. Or at least that was me before I started using Monarch Money. Because between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track of things. And as I said, I'm a business owner. Can't really afford to be losing track of money. Not a good strategy there. And that's where Monarch Money comes in. It's a personal CFO giving full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app like some of these other budgeting apps that you've seen. It is a complete financial command center. I use Monarch Money for my business, Black Rosie Media. I love the dashboards. I love that I can see cash flow in and out. I can itemize things, categorize them, makes it easy when it comes to tax time. I can also have all of my accounts, including savings, investments, all in the same Monarch Money account. So I can truly track my money. The all-in-one convenience is amazing. easy collaborations if you want to partner with a business partner or a life partner and blend all of your financial institutions in one hub, your financial command center. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use promo code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year. All right, Kraken fans. Didn't win the Joel Quenneville lottery. So sad. I'm gutted. That is sarcasm. David Carl not available, not on the table. Lavalette, I've heard tossed around. I don't think that makes sense if we're keeping Capo Caco. We'll hear from him next week in exit interviews as we keep going through the exit interviews of the players that participated in the media side of exit interviews. So I don't know. I think you need a lot, and there are no guarantees, I think, going into this season. I don't think you can afford to give guarantees because everything needs to really be sharp. And is that a role that a quality coach or the right kind of coach for the Kraken at this juncture, is that going to be an attractive role for those coaches? I have my questions, but we'll see how it happens. Before we close out, unfortunately, the Firebirds fall to the Abbotsford Canucks 3-1. That includes an empty net goal, but Abbotsford got the work done early. In the second half of the first frame, Nate Smith and Kirill Kudryavtsev get goals for the Canucks, give them a 2-0 lead before the first intermission. Nobody got on the board in the second frame. Ryan Winterton opens things up at the 3:24 mark for the Coachella Valley Firebirds. Logan Morrison with the assist. Morrison's third assist in these playoffs, Winterton's second goal. But it is Philip DiGiuseppe who gets the game-winning goal, empty net goal, to seal the deal with 1 minute left in the third. So that's a heartbreaker there. John Hayden gets an unsportsmanlike conduct 10-minute in this game late, literally at the 19:59 of the game's basically over. That's not great. He got an unsportsmanlike conduct minor earlier in the game. So Hayden obviously very flustered and riled up by this Abbotsford team. So that puts the Coachella Valley Firebirds on the back foot going into game 4, 2-1 series lead for Abbotsford. When we look at the game report here, once again, nothing given on the power play. Actually, neither of these teams as of yet has given up a power play goal. In the last 2 games, I want to double check that because now that I think about it, I'm wondering if I'm thinking of the Kansas City series, but I do think it's this series because of the Fire and Ice podcast and overview. They had that little nugget in there, but I'll double check that for you. But 18 minutes in the penalty box. Now, that didn't lead to any power play goals for Abbotsford, but it definitely messes up the cadence, right? The flow, the pace of a game. So a little bit more, you just have to find a way to play physical without going overboard and putting yourself and the team in just a bad way. Even if it doesn't give up a power play goal, it just really ruins the flow. And this is a team, the Coachella Valley Firebirds, that can really skate well 5-on-5. So a little bit just refining some of those rough edges, smoothing them out, having a little bit more discipline, understanding how the game is getting played on any given day. So I think they're of course able to bounce back here, and they will have an opportunity to do so in game 4. Game 4 is happening tomorrow, Friday, May 9th, 7 p.m. Pacific time. And so we will see what happens here. It's a must-win game for the Coachella Valley Firebirds. They have to win this game to force a game 5. That would happen on Sunday, May 11th. So definitely we're holding fast. We're staying true for our Coachella Valley Firebirds, always the Seattle Kraken, and of course, the Kansas City Mavericks that will return to action as well. I want to remind you to be kind to yourself and be kind to others. And in case it wasn't clear, that means taking seriously when other people talk about their grievances, when they have been harmed, when their safety, mentally, physically, emotionally, sexually, is not being protected. You have a responsibility when you are a bench boss, when you are the overseer of a group of men tasked and put together to complete a job, to put the best product out there and to try and win a championship. And at the end of the day, this isn't brain surgery. We are not saving lives, but we are definitely impacting lives through the work that happens in hockey. And to not take seriously, that is not to care for others. And honestly, I just have a lot of questions on how someone and their moral compass is set up if they don't see that that's a problem. So I'm hoping for the sake of the Anaheim Ducks and the greater hockey community that Quenneville did learn his lesson. I'm just really grateful that at least for the time being, he doesn't get that redemption tour starting in Seattle. But Seattle definitely has some choices to make. What will it be? Well, we don't know, but we certainly will talk about it as things go on. I think I did all the things, but I'm going to do it again because it's worth saying, especially with what we led the podcast with. Please, please, please be kind to yourself. And that will open up your heart and give you the grace to be kind to others. We hold fast. We stay true. We say, let's go Kraken. Let's go Firebirds, and let's go Mavericks. Big time on the Firebirds for tomorrow, but we'll have another chance to do it all together now. Until the next episode, peace out, everybody. And yes, thank you for the birthday wishes. Mwah. I'll catch you on the next episode.